for you to even have space for creative solutions or innovations or new ways of being and living, you have to make space for these solutions to emerge in your life. But when you're approaching it from a space of stress, then this creativity and these solutions are just going to be left at bay, even though they're just there, but you're too foggy and you're too cluttered to see it.
Welcome to the Conscious Economics Podcast. I'm your host, Rhiannon Roseland. I'm a serial entrepreneur and social innovator. I like to gather people from all different walks to talk about what I call the conscious economy. I believe that we can create a more equitable system, one that honors the well-being of people, the well-being of the planet, the well-being of business, and includes art and creativity. Join us each week as we tackle a different intersection of this big but critical conversation. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Conscious Economics Podcast. I'm your host, Rhiannon Roseland, and we are back here with Aseel to talk about some interesting financial and economic related things. So what is going on today, Aseel?
I was thinking about how heavy the topic of finance has become recently. I mean, it has been a heavy topic for a lot of people for a very long time.
For me. Yeah.
Exactly. But more recently, there's just so much going on. And I really wanted us to just take some time to just kind of decipher everything and also talk a little bit about some of the economic healing work that we are doing in our organization and the importance of that. So this whole thing started when I was reflecting on like my grocery store experience, for example. I used to really love going to the grocery store. Not everybody does.
Me too.
It's not a chore, but I love it. I get to like
nice about it.
Yeah, I get to pick like my fruits and vegetables. Take pride in the healthy choices that I'm making. Pass by the deli and free sample whatever they're offering for the day. There's just something cool about the experience. And more recently, I started recognizing while I was tuning into my body that my drive to the grocery store became this anxious ride. The cost of living increased a lot in Canada. Inflation is now around 7%. And sometimes I'm looking at some of the prices and I'm like, what? Like $7 for these strawberries that are like not even red?
Yeah, I know. My mom called me the other day and she was like, not crying, but she had like a shaking, trembling voice when she told me that she could no longer get the bread that she normally gets because it's $5 a loaf now. And she just like can't justify spending that money for bread. And she was like, I'll just have to go no carb. And I was like, but this is the thing. It's not really going away. Like this is, I think, only the beginning of the ripple effects of the global pandemic.
Yes.
And so now we're witnessing that and we're watching it show up, not just in our food prices, but literally in everything, including in particular here in Canada, it's a housing crisis.
Yes.
And so that has been making people feel like they're never going to have a future opportunity to own a home, which is really scary.
It really is. And I actually was taking some time. I was like making some notes and I wrote down some of the struggles that we have been collectively hit with recently. And just looking at that list, part of it was liberating, just letting it out. So let me just tell you what I wrote.
Yeah.
But it also was like, no wonder our nervous system is like hijacked.
On overdrive.
Absolutely. It's completely hijacked.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So obviously we started with the pandemic. Then we have the fears of the unknown that came up with that. And then the societal divide that was created, like vax versus anti-vax versus a whole bunch of like mask, no mask mandates. Like there's so much societal divide that was created. Families being ripped apart, friendships ending. Don't underestimate the impact that has on us.
Yeah.
Social isolation. I mean, I remember talking to my mom. My mom lived through war. I personally did too, but she had much more war experience than I did. And she actually thought that her experience in the pandemic, being safe in her own home, is actually much worse than what she experienced as a child growing up in a war zone. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that while war is taking place, there's a huge sense of community and oneness and people coming together to help each other. Versus in the pandemic, you couldn't even see your own children. You were like stuck in your home with your doors locked.
Yeah.
And there was
I never even thought about
Yes.
that comparison, but it makes so much sense. And I think also the mask element.
Yes.
It makes you not see someone's face. And so you can't recognize a smile or like a warm glare even, or glance. It's like, because we were doing that, it's almost like we averted our eyes and we weren't even looking at each other anymore.
Yes.
Yeah.
I totally noticed that. Like now walking on the street, you totally feel so awkward bumping into a stranger. And like in the past, I would just look and smile. Now it's just this awkward thing that I don't even know what to do with myself. So these are all really important things to consider and be aware of. And then you have the decline of our mental health. Like regardless what your own mental health state is, collectively, it's massively struggling. And there's weight to that. There's energy, the collective aura, the collective vibration of our society just completely went out of control.
Well, for sure. And then not to mention people losing their jobs, people losing their businesses, people losing loved ones actually passing away from the virus or otherwise. And then it's this feeling as though we want to get back to quote unquote normal, but then when we come out, nothing's really the same, including the prices at the grocery store or the things that we became reliant on as stable.
Yeah. So like now if people are in the market to buy a car or to buy a house or like to buy the day-to-day things that they need, it's a really intense reality that they're facing, because guess what? Their income didn't go anywhere. Their income didn't increase nowhere close to the cost increases that we're witnessing. So there's a lot going on, and not to mention the obviously increasing interest rates that are only going to continue to be hiked. Extreme volatility in the stock market and extreme uncertainty with investment vehicles in general, and obviously global instability and ongoing wars, be it Ukraine, be it Yemen, be it everywhere in the world, really. There's spots of...
And climate change on top of all of that, where we're witnessing that, and we're seeing, and I know like right now here in Canada, we're talking about a fertilizer shortage. And so again, thinking about like what will be the implications for our food supply, and even in the energy supply. My home, I heat on propane, and my bill has literally almost tripled. So it became to the point where I was like, am I even going to be able to afford to, never mind live in my home, even just heat my home? So these are real. Yeah, it's a time.
Yeah, it's a time. And I'm noticing in my body as I go through this with you, like my chest is tightened, my breath is shallow, there's a bit of tension in my stomach. And this is naturally what can happen when we are really engulfed with these headlines and we're engulfed with this reality. We're experiencing it for ourselves, and yet we're also commiserating with other people on it, be it our friends or family members. Like my mom calls me with similar things, and so it's a lot to take on. And part of this episode is first to highlight the intensity of the reality we're dealing with, and for us to cut ourselves some slack. Like we're gonna have days where we're gonna be depleted, we're gonna feel hopeless, we're gonna feel like
just exhausted.
Like our energy is completely run down, and that is okay. Like, can you just pause and look at this list we just went through? And this list is only also recognizing the collective and the global things that are taking place, never mind what's happening in your own individual life.
Oh, for sure. And people have been obviously going through divorces. People have experienced increased violence in the home. Like depending on your socioeconomic status going through this, there's so many layers. So we are listing all of these, but not discrediting anything that you may have experienced that we haven't listed here, because there is just such a broad spectrum. So this is why economic healing is important. Very important. So what do we mean by that? Why don't you kind of tell me what it means to you, and then I can go from there.
So a lot of that, like the root of a lot of this fears and the anxiety and the stress that we're dealing with, when you really strip down a lot of the layers, it boils down to our feeling of security, our feeling of stability, which is a very core human need. The other side of that is also our feelings of not being worthy or capable. Like these are things that are constantly being questioned when we're dealing with all these type of volatilities. Am I capable of keeping up? Am I capable of meeting my life's demands or even growing? Like, let alone not just, because none of us came to this world wanting to just get by. Like, we all have the desire to make the most out of our lives. And now in situations like that, we just become a little bit more distracted, and not a little bit, a lot more distracted and discouraged, quite frankly. So economic healing is really about getting to the roots of what we're really experiencing when we're dealing with all these different headlines and realities in our lives, and to start cultivating a healthy relationship with money and the economy, because ultimately this is such a huge area in our lives, and it's currently being struggling with all the stuff that we're talking about. And it's important that we start addressing this area with new tools. Like, there's obviously practical tools that we continue to need, from like how to manage your cash flow in a time like this. So all these practical tools are so key. But what's really important in this conversation is not just your financial wellness, but your emotional wellness. And that's what a lot of typical financial literacy conversations lack. It's that awareness, that mindset, emotions, beliefs, and thoughts are so important to examine and to heal and to work with in order to build resiliency and actually make us feel more creative, more capable, and much more ready to face these challenges versus wanting to run the other way.
Absolutely. And I would say, if from just another perspective, when we typically think about the economy, our, financial system, it feels very rigid. It feels like this is how it is, and we have to respond to it. These are the expectations. You follow suit. And what I really want to invite in is that we do actually have more control than we think. And that doesn't mean that we can control the price at the grocery store per se, but we can control how we respond to it.
How we respond. That's a huge thing.
And again, when we think about classic, psychology or psychotherapy, we think about this idea of like, there's going to be all of these people and things in your life that are going to come and cause you stress or trigger you. And you can't change them, but you can change yourself. And I don't mean that in the sense that, to underestimate what this feels like when we're practically going through it. But one of the things that I think about is when something feels too heavy that it's going to break you, the answer is let it break. When something is happening that is, feels like you can't control it anymore, then give up control. And so it's this idea, even Serena Ryder, one of my favorite songs from her, she's like, when it gets too heavy, let it break your heart. And it's like, we have to let our hearts break right now. We have to feel that heartbreak. We have to experience it. And then we have to watch what's happening outside and hear the calls of a new system, of a new economy. So when we see that it's become unaffordable, we plant our gardens in our backyards so we can share them with our neighbors. When we see and we feel that there is, oppression all around the world, we cultivate our loved ones close and we figure out how to build community despite it all, like a wartime, and we come into that. And that to me is economic healing. Yes. And it is that expression of finding, how can we love ourselves through this? Yes. How can we love the system through this?
This is the biggest question. How do we love ourselves through this? And don't they say disaster is the mother of innovation?
Yes, and it is. And I'm getting full chills when you say that, because it is. And
I'm going to cry.
I'm going to cry because despite all of what we're witnessing right now, this is the most palpable, creative, innovative time that we have experienced on this planet, because we're watching everything break apart. And I know it's emotional, and I hold space for that emotion too, because you have a baby that's coming into the world. So as I know that feeling, I remember when I was pregnant with both boys, I remember thinking like, what world am I bringing them into? And am I selfish to bring a human being into a world like this? But your baby and all of the generations to come are the builders of the new, and we're witnessing the breaking away of the old. I really do believe that. And there is a silver lining to every heartache. And I know when I reflect, and perhaps you reflect, of the most detrimental experiences of your lifetime, the times when things just went absolutely wrong and things fell apart, look back now and see why that happened and what gift came after, and we can both probably reflect back on those times now that they're past and say, wow, that was a catalyst for me doing this incredible thing or changing this thing or becoming more aligned. So collectively as a whole, as a society, that's kind of what's happening. It's like this rattling and it's all interconnected. People, planet, profit, art. It is all connected. When people are falling apart or falling ill or not able to handle, the planet screams with the same pain, and our profit and our financial markets do the same, and our creativity feels like it's drowning or it's trapped or we can't access it. And so it is this deep-seated interconnection, and economic healing is saying, I want to love this system back to health. I want to nurture myself and others through whatever this is and find a way, because there is always a way.
And this is where you can invite creativity. And I'm going to share some tools because we always love to really anchor these theories into practicality. And the interesting thing about this is for you to even have space for creative solutions or innovations or new ways of being and living, you have to make space for these solutions to emerge in your life. But when you're approaching it from a space of stress and constant combative, your nervous system's overdrive or your stress levels are out of control, then this creativity and these solutions are just going to be left at bay, even though they're just there, but you're too foggy and you're too cluttered to see it. So some of these tools is to help really make space to invite these answers and solutions into our lives, because what we're dealing with is not easy. And we share our vulnerable journey with you. We're not the masters of how this works, but we are trying every day to wake up and own our lives in a way that honors the purpose we're here on this earth to do as we share our purpose with you. It's the biggest blessing I could have possibly asked for. And it was honestly the scariest decision for me to make, to leave a corporate job with a stable income and go on this unpredictable entrepreneurial journey in the midst of all this chaos. I look back and I always question, like, was I foolish in doing that? And every time I meet with a client or go do an economic healing session or get on a podcast like that, I'm constantly validated, like, absolutely not. This was what I'm meant to do. And these tools help me get through the day in really managing my emotions. It's not completely mastering them, but at least managing them, because we're dealing with a lot here.
Hold that thought. We have a quick word from our partners before going back to the episode. This podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, RBC Investies. Backed by expert human advisors, RBC Investies is a smart, online, automated investment service that allows you to invest with low effort and low cost.
Open your first RBC Investies account and pay no management fees for your first year. Plus, start investing with as little as $100. Simply visit rbcinvesties.com/getinvesting and sign up using promo code AA407.
And now back to the episode.
Mm-hmm. So the first one I want to share with you, I've shared it with you before, as a tool. It's a really, really cool concept called the pattern interrupt. Create a pattern interrupt. So let me explain what this is.
Okay.
In our lives, we are constantly operating from a space of patterns. We have memorized routines, memorized ways of being. We wake up in the morning and we have honestly very predictable ways of how our day would go because of the neural wires in our brain that are very much memorized and solidified in a specific way. Mm-hmm. You sense a certain thing, you feel a certain thing, you think a certain thing, you behave a certain thing, and that's the chain. So sensation, emotion, thought, behavior, and that pattern is memorized and compounded throughout the years.
It's autopilot. It's when you can drive to work and you realize, I didn't even notice me driving.
Yeah.
Your mind could go somewhere else because your body is on autopilot. It knows the mechanism, the sensation, the behavior to do that. Mm-hmm. And that is a way that our brain functions.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. One of my patterns that I noticed was every time I wanted to open my credit card bill. And that's regardless of which stage of life I was in. If I was a struggling student barely making ends meet at the start of my career, or even at a much more solid part of my career where I was making six figures, regardless which time this particular behavior was taking place, the pattern was the exact same. I'd have intense heart palpitations. I'll experience like my body temperature changes. I become hot. I feel like a sense of dread that I'm about to open my credit card statement, and I'm almost always shocked at the amount I see, even though I became much more intentional in my buying behaviors and how much money I spend and what I spend it on. I was never a big spender anyway, but it was just always this dread that I'm spending money. So I noticed that pattern, and it was really interesting because these are like I told you the sensations I experienced, the emotions of dread and fear and scarcity and guilt and shame.
And this is why I don't open mine ever. Kind of true.
That's another pattern. See, your
Avoid
pattern
it altogether.
is showing up in a different way.
Shove it in the fireplace. Use it for burning some more wood.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely a different way to deal with it. And you know, once we recognize what's happening, we have the ability now to create a pattern interrupt. So I'll get into it in a minute. So that was my sensation, my emotion, my thoughts were about, how did this amount came about? Am I spending too much? Like all these feelings of, am I able to replace this money easily, etc. And the behavior is, I do always pay my credit card, but there's this sense of like really intense guilt associated. So that was like my experience. And imagine doing that a few times a month, depending on the frequency I was doing it at. And I recognized this pattern and I'm like, okay, I'm going to start creating a pattern interrupt here, because this pattern is established from old behaviors, things I've inherited from the family system I grew up in and the environment I was a part of.
Yeah.
And it was just compounded. And now, like, even when I was in a position where I was making more than enough money and comfortable, I was still experiencing it. So that's what patterns are. They're not reflective of the environment or the situation you're in. These are some memorized unconscious behaviors, and that's why bringing awareness to them is very, very key.
Yeah.
So I noticed that pattern. I said, okay, how can I interrupt it? So I started creating a pattern interrupt by changing the environment in which I've mentioned this before on different platforms. I create a money date. I change the scenery. I introduce soft music. I introduce aromatherapy. I light a candle. So I change the environment in which I'm even opening this bank statement in, so that it's a relaxing, comforting environment versus the anxious environment I used to be in.
My mind, I'm thinking like all these beautiful things, this beautiful music, this candle, and now you're ruining it with the credit card statement. And I just want to say at home, I am kind of joking a little. I don't not pay my credit card, but I do avoid, like I'd rather avoid, and I will wait till the very last moment in order to have to do it. And then it's like a very quick, it's almost like as little as possible. But anyways, I get that helps you in changing the environment and making it like this date with your statement. And I also
came up with a mantra, because that mantra also supports it. And that mantra is really expressing gratitude about how I approach this. So my mantra changes depending on the day and the experience, but something along the lines of, I'm grateful for the privilege I have in being able to pay these bills. I'm intentional in my spending. I have a healthy relationship with money. So different things to reinforce and rewire how my brain approaches this to begin with.
Yeah, I think that's really great. Yeah.
The other ones I really wanted to share is like, definitely take your mindfulness and self-care practices to next level. Mm-hmm. Like you said, we need to love ourselves through these hardships we're experiencing.
100%.
So mindfulness and self-care practices are so essential to help us with that.
Now there is some drilling going on in the background because we are building a garden, exactly what we said, because the food prices have gotten out of control. But one of the things that I think I also want to invite people to do, and this is the whole point of this episode, is to not ignore what is the reality of what's happening. Because the more we try to numb it, try to push it away, try to act like we shouldn't be feeling this way, or it's not that bad, or we just have to carry on anyways, I think that makes it so much worse. And so being able to get together in your group of trusted community, friends, family, and just talking to everyone about how they're navigating this time and being able to create an open, conscious dialogue around it can definitely help as well. That's where creativity is born, when we're able to kind of connect and bring it outside of our own rat wheel in our mind and bring it out, put it on the table, vocalize it, and then be able to come from that perspective.
So maybe you're not going out for a meal as often as you would have liked, but maybe you're hosting people over and you guys are doing potluck. So think about this as an opportunity to create a community, to create a connection back to yourself and back to others in a way that really, really matters. And you'll get through this. Like I've seen worse things happen in the parts of the world I grew up in, and people are always amaze me with their creativity and their ability to adapt. And we don't have to just, settle in. It's not about settling for what we just are handed. It's more about rising above the obstacles and coming up with ways to surpass these challenges.
100%. And we always have the opportunity of, every day we take a breath, we have another opportunity to, do it another way and redefine. So for all of you that are listening right now, we're sending so much love and compassion to everyone out there. These are trying, challenging times. If you're interested in actually tuning into an economic healing session with Conscious Economics, you can do that by going to our website. We offer them monthly. They're free of charge, run by Aseel and myself, and we'd love to see you there. We create a sacred space for people to heal and look at these different patterns and emotions that are coming up with you. So thank you so much, and we'll see you again next week on the Conscious Economics podcast.
Bye.
This podcast is brought to you by CPP Investments. At CPP Investments, they never lose sight of the long term. They invest the Canadian Pension Plan Fund to help provide financial security for generations of Canadians.
They diversify the CPP fund across geographies and asset classes to access the best investment opportunities and generate sustainable long-term returns. The fund is now more than $400 billion.
To learn more about their investment performance for Canadians, visit cppinvestments.com.